There are moments in television that nobody forgets, not because they are loud, not because someone raised their voice or walked off set or broke down in front of a camera, but because something quiet happened, something deliberate and composed and carefully timed, something that, in the space of a few calm minutes, shifted the ground beneath a story that millions of people thought they already understood completely. This was one of those moments. The studio looked like every other morning studio, bright lights, two hosts, the easy rhythm of prearranged questions and well-rehearsed answers. Angela Levin walked in looking precisely like someone who has absolutely nothing to prove, and if you know anything about Angela Levin at all, you already know that is the most dangerous version of her. She sat down, she settled herself, and then she began speaking about Archie and Lilibet, Harry and Meghan's two children, in a way that made the entire room go very, very still. By the time she finished, Harry, according to people directly familiar with the situation, was not still at all, but we will get to that. First, you need to understand who Angela Levin actually is, because that context is not background detail. It is the entire reason this moment landed the way it did. There is a habit when someone says something that cuts straight through the noise of treating them as though they appeared from nowhere, as though credibility is simply a quality some people carry and others don't, with no history behind it and no track record required. That is not how credibility works. And Angela Levin did not appear from nowhere. She is one of the most respected and longest-serving royal correspondents in British journalism. She has spent decades covering the monarchy from the inside, not from the press pack at the perimeter, not from polished official statements, but from within the relationships, the access, the quiet trust that only time and serious work can build. She wrote the authorized biography of Prince Harry, not a book stitched together from tabloid fragments and unnamed sources. An authorized account, which means she spent real time with him. She traveled with him. She sat with him. She heard things directly from that man that the wider public never heard, and in many cases may never hear. She was trusted with the interior of a story that most journalists in this field only ever observe from the outside. That distinction matters more than almost anything else here. When a stranger asks a pointed question about you, dismissing it is easy. When someone who once sat across from you, who listened to your story with genuine care, who earned the access to write the definitive account of your life, when that person asks the same question in front of a national audience, it is a very different thing. It lands differently, it sticks differently, and it is significantly harder to wave away. So what exactly did she say? She said it the way she always says things, calmly, methodically, with the unhurried certainty of someone who has been building toward this point for a long time and has finally decided the moment is right to arrive there. She spoke about the births of Archie and Lilibet. Specifically, she spoke about how those births were handled, publicly, officially, and in direct comparison to every royal birth that had come before them. And here is where the story becomes genuinely difficult to set aside. When Prince George arrived, the British public was informed in precisely the way that centuries of royal tradition demand: formal announcements timed to the minute, confirmations from named medical professionals, official bulletins, sometimes placed on that gilded easel outside Buckingham Palace that has served as a symbol of institutional transparency since 1837. A location, a time, a weight, signatures from the attending team, everything recorded with the specificity that a birth carrying implications for the royal line of succession has always required. The same happened when Princess Charlotte arrived and when Prince Louis came into the world. Each time the structure held, each time the documentation was there, not because the monarchy clings to tradition for its own sake, but because those births carry constitutional weight, and the records surrounding them are the architecture that gives that weight its meaning and its authority. Archie's birth was handled differently. The public learned of it after the fact. The medical details that had always accompanied a royal birth were stripped back. The names of the professionals involved were not provided in the way tradition required. The location was surrounded by conflicting reports that no official statement ever clearly resolved. When the first photographs appeared, royal observers noted immediately how tightly controlled the presentation felt, how unlike anything they had seen in this context before. When they asked why, the answer was privacy. Harry and Meghan had chosen a more private approach, and for many people that explanation was enough. Privacy is a human need. It is a reasonable thing to want, especially for your children. But Angela Levin asked the question that the privacy explanation simply cannot answer. If privacy was truly the priority, she said, then why have Harry and Meghan spent the years since those births doing almost the exact opposite of living privately? Why the Netflix documentary that threw open the doors of their personal life to tens of millions of viewers worldwide? Why the Oprah interview that placed the most intimate details of their royal experience, including specific explosive claims about how their children were treated by the institution, on the permanent public record? Why the memoir that committed private conversations and private grief to print for anyone in the world to read? You cannot use privacy to justify stepping away from the transparency that royal births have always required, and simultaneously build an entire media career on the foundation of your children's royal identity. Either those births carry the weight that royal births have always carried, and the documentation that comes with that weight is not optional, or they do not. But you cannot hold both positions at the same time and expect people not to notice the space between them. The studio held that question in silence for a moment, not the silence of surprise, the silence of recognition. And somewhere in California, a phone started ringing. Let's talk about what Harry did next, because this is the part that changed the entire shape of the story, not what Angela Levin said, what Harry did after she said it. When someone asks you a question you can easily answer, you answer it simply and clearly. You stay calm, you state the facts, you let the answer do its work. And the story loses its power because you took away the one thing giving it power, the silence, the unanswered gap, the space where clarity should exist but doesn't. Harry did not do that. What happened instead, according to multiple people close to the situation, was the opposite of calm. Phones were ringing, meetings were being called urgently. People around Harry were scrambling to manage a story already moving faster than any response could catch up to. The word that kept appearing from source after source was always the same: tense. Harry was tense. The atmosphere around him was tense, and that tension, visible, public, impossible to contain, quickly became a story entirely its own. There is something every crisis manager, every lawyer, every communications professional knows before they know anything else. The way you respond to a question always matters more than the question itself. Always. Because when someone asks you something and you answer it calmly and clearly, people move on. But when someone asks you something and you react with urgency and visible panic, people stop. They lean in. They ask themselves why a simple question is producing a response that looks anything but simple. That is exactly what happened here. On one side of the story sat Angela Levin in that studio, speaking in her steady, unhurried voice, asking questions without raising her voice, without pointing fingers, without accusing anyone of anything directly, just laying out what was publicly known, identifying what appeared to be missing, and letting the audience sit with the gap between those two things. She looked like someone who had been waiting patiently for the right moment to say what she was saying, and had finally decided it had arrived. She looked completely at peace with every word. On the other side was Harry, reportedly surrounded by urgency, reportedly surrounded by people trying to manage a situation that kept growing, reportedly anything but at peace. The contrast was so sharp it needed no explanation. A composed journalist asking calm questions on one side, a reportedly frantic prince trying to contain the damage on the other. People did not need to be told what to make of that image. They made something of it all on their own, and what they made was not flattering. Social media moved fast. Within hours, the clips from Angela Levin's appearance were everywhere, not because of a campaign or a coordinated push, because people were sharing them with the natural enthusiasm of people who feel they have just been shown something true, something they had already sensed but could not quite name. Something sitting just below the surface of the official story finally brought up into the light. And then there was Meghan, or more accurately, there was Meghan's absence. Because while the clips were spreading, while Harry was reportedly tense and reactive, while the story grew faster than anyone around them could manage, Meghan was nowhere, not a statement, not an appearance, not a single public word. Think carefully about that. This is a woman who sat across from Oprah Winfrey in front of the entire world and spoke openly about her mental health, her children, race, pain, and what life inside the royal family had taken from her. She did not shy away from any of it. She leaned into every difficult question with precision and intelligence, and she walked out of that interview having told the story exactly the way she wanted it told. That version of Meghan, confident, present, fully in command, was nowhere to be found when Angela Levin was raising questions about her pregnancies, about her children's births, about her own choices and her own body. She was simply gone. People noticed immediately. Within hours, Where is Meghan was trending not as a joke, not as a meme, but as a genuine question from millions of people who had watched this couple operate as a united front for years. Every interview together, every documentary, coordinated, every public statement aligned. The entire brand they had built rested on the image of two people who always showed up for each other, always faced the world as a team. But this time, Harry appeared completely alone. Some argued Meghan's silence was a deliberate strategy. Stay quiet, let the noise fade, deny the story the oxygen it needs to keep burning. That is a reasonable theory. Meghan is careful and she is smart and she does not act carelessly. But strategic silence only works when it reads as confidence, as someone too secure to bother responding. When silence lands alongside reports of a panicked husband, alongside millions of people asking where you are, alongside a story that directly concerns your pregnancies and your children, it does not read as confidence, it reads as distance. As someone who stepped back and left another person to carry the full weight of something they should be carrying together. And once people saw that, Harry alone, Meghan absent, the united front with a visible crack running straight through it, they could not unsee it. That crack did not close. It got wider every hour. The silence continued. Now let's talk about the children. Because underneath all of this, underneath the trending hashtags and the split screens and the media storm, there are two small children who have no idea any of this is happening. Two kids who did not choose to be born into this family, who did not ask to be placed at the center of one of the most talked about controversies in the world, who did not choose any of it, and who are going to have to live with all of it regardless. Archie and Lilibet. Their images are controlled with extraordinary precision. They are shown when being shown serves a purpose. They are hidden when hiding serves a purpose. They appear in carefully selected photographs at carefully chosen moments and then vanish again until their presence is useful once more. Their names, their titles, their existence are invoked whenever Harry or Meghan need to make a point about what the royal family did or did not provide for them. And then, when questions arise about the details of their births, about the documentation that has always accompanied births of this kind, suddenly the children must be protected. Suddenly privacy becomes the priority again. That is not protection, that is management. Children are not brand assets, they are not narrative tools. They are not leverage in a disagreement with an institution. They are people. Small people who grow quickly and who will one day, sooner than any parent is ever ready for, be old enough to search their own names on the internet. What will Archie find when he does? He will find years of headlines, years of debate about who he is, years of questions about his birth, his titles, his existence. He will find strangers arguing about him in comment sections. He will find journalists raising questions about the circumstances of his arrival into the world. He will find all of it, every piece of it, permanently stored and permanently searchable, because nothing disappears, everything waits. The controversy being generated right now does not vanish when these children grow up. It becomes the permanent backdrop to their lives. Every unanswered question will still be there, patient and waiting, the day they are old enough to go looking. And then there is the title question. because this is where the deepest contradiction in the whole story lives. Harry and Meghan moved to California. They have spoken at length about wanting a normal private life for their children, a childhood away from the cameras and the pressure and the institutional weight that Harry says damaged him growing up. Those are not unreasonable things to want. Most parents want exactly that: quiet, safety, a childhood that belongs to the child rather than to the public. But the titles do the exact opposite of all of that. The titles attach Archie and Lilibet permanently to an institution their parents have publicly and repeatedly said they needed to escape. The titles make them targets for attention, for commentary, for the kind of scrutiny that follows a royal title the way a shadow follows a person in sunlight. So why keep them? The answer that makes the most logical sense, the one Angela Levin pointed to directly, is that the titles are not being kept for the children's benefit. They are being kept as leverage, a card that has not been played yet but has not been put down either, a bargaining chip, an insurance policy, a future weapon, kept in a drawer, available when needed. If that is true, it is one of the coldest calculations a parent can make. Attaching your children to a feud, to a controversy, to a political strategy, not because it helps them, but because it protects your position. Prince William, by all accounts, is watching every move very carefully. So where does this end? That is the question sitting underneath every part of this story. And the honest answer is that nobody outside that Montecito household knows for certain. But some things are clear. The questions Angela Levin raised are not going away. They have been asked on a national platform by one of the most credible voices in royal journalism. They have been shared millions of times. They have crossed from fringe conversation into permanent mainstream record, and without a clear, direct, documented answer, they will not shrink, they will grow. Harry's reaction made things considerably worse, not because reacting is wrong, but because the nature of the reaction, the urgency, the visible scramble, the tension that leaked out in every direction, told its own story. Calm questions do not produce panicked responses unless the questions have landed on something real. Millions of people read this situation the same way. Meghan's silence opened a crack that her most loyal supporters struggled to explain. The woman who spoke so powerfully about her own truth had nothing to say when the conversation turned to her own pregnancies, her own children, her own body. That image, Harry alone, Meghan absent, the famous united front fractured, is not something the public forgets quickly. And the children are growing, every day older, every day the internet fuller. Every day the gap between the private childhood Harry and Meghan describe and the reality Archie and Lilibet are actually inheriting becomes harder to close. The only people who can end this story are Harry and Meghan themselves. They can answer the questions, they can provide the clarity, they can choose finally and completely between the institution and the private life, and commit to that choice fully, rather than keeping one foot in each world while insisting they have left the first one entirely behind. They have always had that power. The question is whether they will ever choose to use it. And until they do, the questions Angela Levin asked in that quiet, composed, completely devastating way of hers will keep doing exactly what good questions always do. They will keep demanding an answer,